I just muted myself instead of unmuting myself. Thanks, Brian. So excited to be here. MidCamp is one of my favorite conferences. And I was sad to think it wouldn't happen, and then it happened. And so this is great. So welcome to Stories to Help You Level Up at the first ever virtual MidCamp. I'm so excited to have you here. I got a new webcam just for this. And excited to go on a little storytelling adventure together. This is a new talk. It's near and dear to my heart. It's kind of like an origin story, but it's kind of built in a way that it's to give you ideas and tips on how to achieve the kind of career development that you're looking for. The experiences that kind of come from backgrounds like mine, being underrepresented in tech. And so it's really meant to support you and things you want to be thinking about and or the struggles that you're currently facing. So my name is Fatima. I'm better known on the internet as Sugar Overflow. I'm a developer programs engineer at Pantheon, which means I work on developer tools. I give talks like this one, write documentation, and engage with our open source communities. I like emojis a lot and Pokemon, so you might see both of those things throughout this presentation. So I think this slide is more for me, really, to talk about why I'm giving this talk. This is like very different from the talks I usually give, but I wanted to talk about why a little bit. And this is because I was fortunate enough to go to university for computer science, but I was pretty miserable for the first couple years, especially because I didn't feel like I knew everything and I wasn't doing really well. And everybody else seemed like they had been programming for years. And I could give a whole talk about being the only girl in math or engineering classes. But fast forwarding a little bit, I ended up doing really well in the last year. Found things that I was really good at, game programming or like understanding algorithms. So some of the stuff started to click and I was like, okay, maybe I can be a programmer. Maybe this wasn't a bad idea. But after I left university, I kept getting assigned to front-end tasks almost at every job that I worked at. Usually it was because there was a backend developer on the team that was like really good at what they did, or didn't communicate in plain English and only spoke developer speak. And so I couldn't communicate with these people. And so I couldn't learn how to do tasks or get mentored on the things that I really wanted to do. That's not to say front-end development isn't awesome. I think it is. I'm actually like a huge consumer of pretty UIs and nice websites. But I started doing a little bit of backend development and it was so thrilling that I was like, that right there is what I want to continue doing. But the hard part was finding, space at jobs and talking to managers and being like, I know you know that I'm good at theming, but what I really want to do is the backend. And so as I kind of struggled to get to that point, and then moved from there to developer relations, I learned a lot of things that I want to impart to people who are navigating similar problems or people who are looking for new tools that might add to their tool set in their career adventure. Some of these are things that I wish I knew or wish I had thought of. I learned the hard way. And so hopefully something will be of use to you that you can add to what you're thinking about and in your careers. So a couple of years ago, when I first started getting started in Drupal, I landed a job at a Drupal agency. I came into the company with a lot of fanfare. I was one of the few people there who had a degree. I was moving across the country to work for them and had already been working as an intermediate developer. But I was new to Drupal, so I did not understand hooks or any of the Drupal things. And so when I got added to a project team and I started working on things, I think my team lead gave me the benefit of the doubt, oh, this fancy developer has come to work for us. But whenever he would see my pull requests, we would headbutt a lot because I was making these like small mistakes, like forgot to lint my code, left debug statements in there, didn't test it properly, didn't check what happens when you like log out and then look at the node. And so like I was able to build things, but I wasn't able to test them thoroughly, or there were all these little things that needed to be fixed. So we went back and forth a lot on some of the code. And what would happen is like, let's say that this 2-week sprint is due Friday. Like on Thursday, he would be so fed up and he would be like, look, I've tried to go back and forth with you on this for 3 or 4 days. And we can't continue doing this. So I'm just going to take it on. I'm going to fix it up and I'm going to submit it to the client. And like that happened a couple of times. I would say like 4 times before I was so humiliated that I was like, I cannot be responsible for you to stay late fixing my code because I can't do it properly myself. And that's just unacceptable for me as a coworker, to not be able to like, hold my own weight in a way. And so being that he was like a really patient person and like always took the time to be like, hey, like I fixed your stuff. I know we didn't have time to go over it, but like here are the commit messages. You can look it over. If you have questions, let me know. And so I was like, okay, how can I do better? So I sat down with him and my manager and I was like, this is not working. I'm like trying my best, but I keep making the same mistakes. And they were like, oh, maybe you go too fast. Like we've noticed that you like complete tickets that are, estimated for 4 hours and 1 hour. And so you should slow down, take your time, check the things before you check them in, things like that. And I was like, okay, I can try that. I'm always in a rush. And so I sat with that for a while. I tried working on one ticket and then finishing it and then not submitting it, starting the other one, working on it. And then like when the second one was ready, going back to the first one to review it. I thought like maybe that'll give me fresh eyes, maybe I might see something that I missed the first time, like reverse engineering the little issues that I was working on to like maybe catch something. This did help with things like leaving debug statements, not commenting my code, or like missing whole pieces of functionality. But like it didn't help on the larger scale, and so I was still doing things quickly and still missing a lot of things, and people still had to kind of like fix up my code. And so eventually, we still had these headbutt moments, and it wasn't like a great environment. So I went back to my manager and I brought my tech lead there too, and I was like, it's not that I'm in a rush. I don't think that that's the solution, because I'm not careless. I don't know what else you want me to do. Like I've looked at it backwards. I looked at it after 2 hours. I've looked at it line by line. Like, what more do you want from me? And so I think what we realized, we had this like light bulb moment where I was like, I need more strategy. Like I need more tools, or like, tell me what you do. And so my team lead and I like sat down and he took like a pull request and walked me through like, here's what I do first. I look through the diff on GitHub and then I go line by line. If I see something that, doesn't make sense, I leave a comment for you. And then I, pull your branch down, I test it. Here's how I test it. Like if it's something that's changing permissions, I test it with different users. If it's something that's like on the front end, I look at it from incognito. I look at it from all these other browsers. And so just sitting with him and seeing like his entire process for testing my code review kind of told me like all of the things that I could do myself before it went to him, so that by the time he did it, it would be like super clean. And so for me, that was really valuable. So I took all of that helped. And then I think someone recommended to me, like, why don't you ask your, coworkers or your friends who are developers, like what their process is like how they take a ticket. And just because client work was new to me. And so like, how do people take a ticket? Do they first like plan out what they're going to build? And when they're planning that out, do they prototype it? And so like getting advice from everybody and trying to understand the different ways in which they worked was really valuable to me, especially because before that job, I had been working in government all by myself. And before that, I was in school. And so I didn't really have good examples of how people work. And I really appreciated that people were open about their strategies and their processes. And like nowadays, we have all these Slacks for different groups, and people share their work and they blog about it. And so I think a great thing to do is to just kind of open yourself up to maybe there are things you can add to your workflows, things like that. So that was like a great success for me. I learned a lot of good best practices and was able to kind of apply them in future jobs as well, and work on more complex projects, and become like an asset for that company. But if we were to like really break down the things that I learned more succinctly, I would say one was like feedback mechanism, like learning to communicate and get and receive feedback. And the other was like figuring out how I can improve myself. So when thinking about feedback, I've always found it's very, it's much easier to think about these things when you formulate them as questions. So like, how can I best give and receive feedback? How do I like to receive feedback? People have different ways that they like to receive feedback. I once worked with a coworker who insisted that she wanted to receive feedback between positive reinforcements. And so when we talked to her, we would say like, hey, I think what you did is really great. I think like section A was particularly awesome, but section B, I think you could have done better. Here's how. And then end it with like, but you're doing great work, and like reinforcing that she was really awesome and she needed to be reminded that. And that was like totally cool. But I've also worked with people that are like, please leave out all of the fluff and tell me exactly what you want me to change, and I will change it. And I've like slowly become that person where even when I'm driving and I'm like with a friend and I'm like, look, I'm a new driver, like if I'm doing something wrong, just tell me and I will fix it. And so know how you like to receive feedback. And then, if you're lucky and you have a good mentor, you can talk with them about it. You can figure out different ways of it over time. But not everyone is lucky enough to have a great mentor. So you might have to figure it out on your own, and then figure out how you can communicate that to your team, and kind of figure out ways for your team to share and give that feedback. Maybe you like it in one-on-one, so maybe that feedback should be in a video call, face-to-face, or maybe you don't want that kind of face-to-face interaction. Maybe you just want an email that you can take with and sit on and kind of process over a couple of days. And so check in with yourself and figure out what that is. And then, as a team, I think one of the things that I've used at a previous job to figure out how we can work well together better is something called a user manual. And so I learned about this when I was working for government in Canada. It's like there's a lot of methods to build teams and collaborations, but I think this is a simple way to start new teams, or when you add a new teammate, maybe it's good to kind of check in on everyone's norms. So this also includes the ways that you like to receive feedback, but also, the hours and times I like to work, best ways to communicate with me. There should be a caveat that like not all your needs and preferences can always be met with this, but it's important for your team to kind of know what your preferences are, and there's value in making them explicit, so that people you work with, have a sort of way or a measurement for, to be on your good side, to kind of release some of that pressure that comes with like interactions and communication. So we could just talk about it, and that should maybe help it out. And then the other thing that I considered from that job was like, how can I get better at what I do? Are there parts of my process that I can improve, things that I can learn from other developers or include in my tool set? I ask myself this question very often. And as my coworkers know, I'm like super into connecting workflows together or using new apps and testing strategies. And so I have a couple of apps today that I think are always going to be a part of my workflow that I want to share with you. So the first one is Kaleidoscope. So Kaleidoscope is an app that allows you to see a visual diff. I actually wanted to show you a demo. So let me see if I can pull my terminal over here. I can't. Hang on. I have to zoom this out. No sharing. So Alex is here on the call too. So I'm going to use the docs repo as an example. So the other day I was working on our docs site at Pantheon. I was working on writing documentation for build tools. So let's say that I'm working on this branch and I would like to see like, okay, I'm almost done working. I want to see it. I want to see how many things I've changed and how they differ from master. So I would do get diff tool master. You have to kind of configure Kaleidoscope to do that for you. But what's great about this app is it'll put up all of the changes that I've made compared to the branch that I specified. So I'm able to kind of jump through and see like, oh, here are some edits, here's a removal, here's where I added a lot of text. In this particular example, most of this is all language because it is a docs repo. But when you're working with really complex projects and code and like multi-sites, it's great to kind of visually see that before you push anything or commit anything. I know some people can be nervous about committing code that's not great. So this is a great way to check yourself and kind of test through as you go, and kind of give yourself a little bit of confidence as well. And this is actually how I started figuring out that I was leaving debug statements in in files, because sometimes when you're debugging, you're like jumping around all these different parts of a project, but then when you found the thing that you need, you forget that you left a devel somewhere. So this is great to find those sneaky little pieces that sometimes escape you. So Kaleidoscope, really recommend this tool. Another one that I learned while I was doing front-end development is ScreenFlow. So what ScreenFlow lets you do, here's what I'll do. I'll show you a screenshot of my notes, is take these floating screenshots and drag them around with you wherever you go. And so what's really cool about that is, like, if you're working on a ticket that's on Jira, you can take a screenshot of that, take it with you. You know, if you're, you know, got some mock-up that you want to keep on the screen while you're working, it's really awesome for little pieces of things. I call this like a convenience solving app, because I don't think that it's like mission critical, but it definitely makes my life easier sometimes. So ScreenFlow. So I linked these on the slides, and I think the slides I'll upload them to the page. But thank you, David. You're always on point. Both of those apps I think are paid. I think ScreenFlow might have like a free trial that you can test out. But not always to mention that, like, you can always look at the diff on GitHub as well. And it's gotten better over the years. Now you can sort by type of file, you can sort by language, you can have discussions here. When I started working in government, they had never used GitHub before at Transport Canada. And so a lot of the things that we did here were really useful for them to like share and collaborate on code in different ways. Snippets Lab is another really cool one that I haven't set up on this laptop yet. But what it does is you can save different snippets, different languages, different things that you write repetitively, like a really cool function that you wrote. Maybe it was like a hook alter for something that you think is neat, and maybe you don't want to share that with the rest of your team, but you can share that with yourself, and you can keep it there. And then it's also got some integrations with things like Alfred, which is kind of a shortcut. It's kind of like a spotlight replacement, so you can kind of have it dump into things. How to create, yeah, Veterans Affairs Canada. Had to create the Depart GitHub account. Yeah, I was working at Transport Canada, and I think everyone was really nervous about working in branches and like, how can we all work on the same code together in public? And so GitLab was great for us to get familiar with that. Another thing that I learned from my very great supportive mentor back in the days was the GetAdd patch command. And so what this lets you do is add pieces of your code. So like, let's say you've changed like 15 different files. If you do GetAdd-P, it'll show you each chunk at a time, and you can be like, yes, I want to commit that. No, I don't want to commit that. Or I'll take a look at that one later. And it's really great because it's interactive. And it's really fun to, it's fun, and it's also really useful because you can kind of parse through all of the changes you've made. So if you're not looking at them visually like Kaleidoscope, you can also do it this way. In my workflow, I usually do GetAdd patch first, and I say yes, no, and then when I'm done, I take a look at it in Kaleidoscope again, just to make sure, because I think looking at code in a terminal window versus looking at code in like a visual window, it can look different, and that can help you catch changes. What I also like is it'll be like, do you want to commit this hunk? And I'm like, yes, I'm going to commit this hunk. All of this to say that you should totally build your own workflows. When I was working with client sites at Echidna, I learned a lot about like Drupal and all the different things that you should do in order to make sure the thing that you did is working. And so I started creating checklists. And at first it felt really silly. I was like, oh, I'm creating checklists for things that I'm going to learn how to do, and then maybe I'll never use these checklists again. But actually they were really useful, because the more you repeat tasks in this way, the more you'll start to remember it. And so, you know, if you're someone like me who likes to make lists and put lists of things, like create a checklist, and then eventually it'll just become your habit. So there's a lot of blog posts around. People talk all the time about how they do development. And so what I do is I read them, and then I take what I like, and then I put together my own workflow. So we are at 20 minutes. Oops. I have another story. And then I have more stuff. I'll just keep going, and then I'll try to leave some time for questions. So the second story that I had to share with you today was about getting promoted. So I started working at a job where I was told in 6 months I would get promoted from like a junior intermediate level developer to like a leadership level developer. But 6 months in, they were like, hey, we can't really promote you just yet. We don't think you're ready. You need to work on a bigger project. You need to work on a more public project. It's not really fair to the other junior developers. And I was like, okay, but like other junior developers and I are not at the same level. Like this isn't really fair. Like, well, what are the metrics that you want me to meet? Like, what's this like hypothetical? You're not ready yet. And so there were really no clear guidelines at that job. I was told things like you should do 15% more mentoring or 5% leadership, and like that wasn't really clear to me, like what that meant, and it was a really hard metric to like reach. And so I asked the person that I was mentoring. I started mentoring someone at work, and so I asked him. I was like, "Hey, like, am I a good mentor?" And he was like, "Yeah, you're great. Like, I'm learning so much." And I was like, "Please mention that to your manager. To mention that to my manager, because I'm having a hard time getting a promotion." And he did that, and that, my manager was like, "I kind of heard from so and so that you're doing a great job," and I was like, "Success." But that still wasn't enough. I really had to fight for it. And so we had a client that really loved me working as a backend developer for them. But my company would take me off that project and put somebody else on it. And then the client would be like, nope, we want her back. And I was like, this is a great opportunity for me to use. And so the next time the client was like, hey, like, we saw that they took you off again, but we really want you back on this project. I was like, when you ask, can you also like put in a slight recommendation? And I was like, I'm taking you into confidence. I'm trying to get this promotion. It's been 6 months. They're delaying it. And like, your word means a lot to the company. So if you could do that for me, that would be really awesome. And they were like, absolutely, yes, we want to support women in tech. And they did that. And my manager, I think she at that point realized what I was doing and that I was getting a little bit sneaky with it. But it worked for me. But sadly, it turned out that like that promotion was just a lot of burnout and a lot of work that I didn't really like. And so it was like, I thought it was the job I wanted, but I eventually left after that because it was just not great management and not a great position. And it was just like a lot of overtime. But I did learn a lot from the experience, and I wanted to share some of those things with you. So what do I think about when I'm thinking about different roles? It's like, what do I want to gain from this job? Where do I want to be a year from now? Maybe 3 years from now? Does this role help me get there? If you're already in a job, like what are your organization's policies for promotions? Like what's that career ladder? Where can you grow? And then, think about things like, is this role fulfilling for you? I think a lot of people forget, women especially, that like the job is not just for the company. The job is also for you. It's not just about what the company is giving you, but it's also about what you're giving the company. And sometimes the thing you want isn't what's right for you as a person. So be kind to yourself and try to figure out, what the things that are important to you are. For me, some of that is like, what's the feedback mechanism? Like, what kind of performance reviews happen? When do they happen? Who they happen with? And those are the kinds of questions that I ask when I'm starting a new job. And from being sneaky, I've learned a couple of things. Track your own time. If your organization doesn't track time, just do it yourself. I do this because then I can export, the things that I've worked on, and that gives me kind of fuel for having conversations like, maybe I'm doing too much of this project, even though our priorities is this project. And so I've learned that like, if you don't have the data, people just talk about, their feelings. Often, like if a manager ever came to me and was like, I feel like you didn't do enough mentoring, I'd get really frustrated because I would be like, hey, that's probably your bias. Like I do so much mentoring, but also like you scheduled me for too much other stuff, so I can't do any mentoring. And so to avoid some of those conversations, I've learned that like, just have your data and like use your data. And I used to like look at my harvest at an agency and make sure that it was matching up to the promotion harvest. So like I was told like 15% mentoring. And so I was making sure that like the hours that I had logged for the quarter were around 15% of the quarter, so that I could go into my review and be like, there, I did what you asked. Now give me the title. And so check your time. Some of the ideas that I thought about to explore some of these things I've done, like being really clear about your goals. I've been really honest when I joined some companies where I would just say like, hey, like I left my last company because they promised things and then they didn't do it, and then they just used me as a diversity token. I don't want that to happen here, so I'm putting that up front. And so just be really clear. Sometimes people appreciate it, sometimes they don't. You're better off at the places that do. Sometimes if your team's really toxic, you know, I had a pretty rough experience on my fellowship project where my teammates didn't really get along. So we did all our meetings and conversations in a team Slack channel, and we had somebody from like upper management as a mediator to kind of help some of those conversations when they got a little bit too heated. It was honestly the most difficult team that I worked on, but having conversations in the open helped everyone be accountable, that people were watching, and so that was helpful. Running out of time. Stuff to think about. Know what's important to you. You know, some of the things that I think about when I'm looking at jobs are kind of like, what's the salary, what's the benefits, but also things like, who are my teammates, who leads this company, what are their values, are those values in alignment with mine? So I have this like list of 35 questions that I ask myself when I'm looking at a job or a role. And then I kind of rank them like, this meets the expectations, this doesn't, this company does really well, this doesn't. And it's not the data that's important or the weighted scores that's important, but it's the process of kind of going through like, what's important to me, what's important to this company, do these things line up? And then the other thing I do is research people that I think are cool. I just like go to their LinkedIn's, read their blogs, see what their career trajectory is, see what kind of they studied or what kinds of things they're working on, because those are the people that I think are awesome. And by looking at what they're doing, I can kind of figure out the things that I would like to do. And the most terrifying advice that I've always gotten, that I've always like been really scared to use, is ask for the job you want. Don't be afraid to just email someone you've met at a conference. Maybe you had a good interaction. Be like, hey, I know you work. I did this with Mozilla before I got the job at Phantom. I was like, I know you work at Mozilla, and there's this cool person who writes really cool blog posts as a part of your community initiatives. Like, I want that job. And it turned out like that it wasn't a great team to work on, and that's okay. But it was a good practice to just go and ask for the thing that I wanted. And finally, continuously reevaluate your job and the environment that you work in. Just because it's really important to remember that there is a balance. So things that the organization provides me, things that I bring to the organization. There are a lot of times where I felt that this balance would get skewed. When I was working for Boston.gov, oh my God, I'm naming names. That was my first job out of college. So like what the organization provided me was like, oh my God, this is civic tech. I'm working for the people. I'm running all the systems for the city of Boston.gov. Oh my God, my hours are awful, but that's okay because I'm doing this amazing work that is civic. And so for me, it was like, the balance was like this, where the organization was, you know, it was cool work, and I didn't feel, you know, that great about it, but I was willing to do it because it was worth it. And for me, it was like, it's okay that I'm suffering because I'm doing some really cool shit. But as I got older, I realized, and I'm still pretty young, so it's funny to talk to veterans and tell them that, but as you get older, you start to kind of not want that balance, work-life balance, to be really awful. So please continue to evaluate, you know, what your balance is, what you're bringing, and what the organization is giving to you. And, you know, and if the organization stops giving you the things or the things that you came there for, like, it's okay to leave. I had a really eye-to-eye conversation with a manager once where I was like, here are the 6 things I came here for, and you're not doing any of them anymore. And she was like, wow, okay, let's try for the next 3 months and see what happens. And 3 months later, we checked in, and she was like, I'm sorry, like, we either don't have the resources or we just can't support you in those 6 ways anymore. And I was like, well, I guess that's goodbye. And that was like the nicest way that I left a job. Because we kind of just realized that like it wasn't working out anymore. And so, yeah, evaluate your balances. And finally, have friends in your life that think you're awesome. Because at the end of the day, we live in a really, really tough world and tough times. And sometimes we forget to be kind to the most important person, and that's ourselves. So check in with yourselves and your family. And when you feel like things are going rough, like trust your instincts and talk to your friends. I forgot to put the feedback link in here. But maybe we can put it in the chat.
Yep,
30
it's on
minutes
the,
is not enough.
it's also on the session node on the MidCamp site as well. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you, awesome. Brian. Thank you, Benji.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I think we have like 2 minutes. But I'm also in the Slack and on Discord, and happy to have one-on-one conversations with anyone if you want to reach out to me.
Yep. And another thing that that other talks and rooms have been doing, there are rooms for each channels in the MidCamp Slack for each of the rooms. So sometimes overflow Q&A has been going there. So
okay, sure. I can create a Slack channel.
well, it should already be there, so you could just join it.
What should I search for? It's the room number. So we're 31 something B.
something 314B.
Yes, we're 314B. So I'll be in 314B because I didn't leave much time for questions.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Oh my God, we did a virtual camera.
Oh yeah, and everybody can unmute and like actually clap.
Thank you.
Use the clap symbol in Zoom. Nice to feel like real people for a minute.
We should have just had like a fireside chat.